Every day, a young boy's teacher took his lunch, using his authority to bully him while the class watched in silence. Too scared to speak up, the boy endured it, until one day he told his father. But instead of just complaining, his father had a plan. The next morning, the boy walked into class with something hidden inside his lunchbox. When the teacher opened it, his face went pale. What did he find? Why did the entire class gasp? And how did this one moment bring down a man who thought he was untouchable? You won't believe what happened next. A teacher stealing a student's lunch every day, who would believe it? But for one little boy, this was his harsh reality. Every afternoon, as the other children unpacked their meals, he watched helplessly as his teacher, Mr. Collins, reached over and took his lunchbox with a smug expression, as if daring him to protest. The boy, Jordan Carter, sat frozen, gripping the straps of his backpack tightly, his small hands trembling. He wanted to speak up, to tell someone, but the fear of what might happen next kept him silent. He had learned the hard way that challenging an adult, especially one in power, could only make things worse. So, day after day, he let it happen, swallowing the hunger and the shame, hoping that someone, anyone, would notice. But then, one evening, his father found out. And instead of just comforting his son or filing a complaint that would likely be ignored, he had a different plan. The next morning, as Jordan walked into class, his backpack felt heavier than usual, though not because of books. Inside, carefully, placed by his father, was something that would change everything. What was it? And how would it bring justice to a teacher who thought he was untouchable? Before we get into this shocking story, have you ever seen someone abuse their power like this? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this, because what happens next will leave everyone in that classroom speechless. Jordan Carter was a quiet, thoughtful 7-year-old, the kind of child who never caused trouble, always did his homework, and tried to stay out of the way. He wasn't the loudest in the classroom or the first to raise his hand, but he was bright. His teachers always said so. Yet, despite his intelligence and kind nature, he had learned early on that being different in his school came with challenges. As one of the few black students in an elite private elementary school, he often felt like he had to prove himself in ways his classmates didn't. But nothing had prepared him for Mr. Richard Collins. Mr. Collins was the type of teacher everyone respected on the surface but feared underneath. In his late 40s, he carried himself with an air of authority that kept students in check. He was strict, demanding, and, at times, cruel, especially to those who couldn't fight back. His reputation for singling out certain students was known but never questioned. He didn't yell or physically punish anyone, but his subtle bullying was just as damaging. The way he picked favorites, the way he humiliated kids who struggled, and, worst of all, the way he enforced rules that didn't seem to apply to everyone equally, it was all part of his carefully concealed cruelty. Jordan became his latest target. It started small, almost unnoticeable. Mr. Collins would stop Jordan in the cafeteria line, inspecting his lunch with exaggerated care before handing it back with a condescending smirk. Then, one day, he didn't give it back. "School, policy," he had said dismissively, tucking Jordan's lunch into his desk drawer while the boy stood there stunned. Jordan had wanted to protest, but the look on Mr. Collins' face made it clear. This wasn't up for discussion. Day after day, it happened again. Mr. Collins would call Jordan up before lunchtime, open his lunchbox, and shake his head disapprovingly. "We can't allow outside food that doesn't meet our health standards," he would say. even though Jordan's lunch was no different from anyone else's. Then he would confiscate it, leaving Jordan hungry while the other kids pretended not to notice. Some of them cast sympathetic glances, but no one spoke up. No one wanted to be the next target. Jordan never told his father, Marcus Carter. He knew his dad worked long hours to make sure he had everything he needed, and he didn't want to add to his stress. Besides, what if speaking up only made things worse? What if Mr. Collins found another way to punish him? So Jordan stayed quiet, enduring the humiliation, hoping that maybe one day the teacher would stop on his own. But then, something changed. One afternoon, as Mr. Collins reached for Jordan's lunchbox, the boy hesitated. For the first time, he didn't immediately hand it over. His fingers tightened around the handle, his heart pounding in his chest. For a brief moment, he considered saying no. Mr. Collins noticed. His sharp blue eyes darkened as he leaned down slightly, lowering his voice so only Jordan could hear. "Don't forget who's in charge," he whispered, his tone laced with quiet threat. Jordan felt the air leave his lungs. Slowly, he loosened his grip, letting Mr. Collins take the lunchbox once again. That night, he couldn't hold it in any longer. Sitting at the kitchen table, pushing his food around his plate, Jordan finally broke down. His small voice trembled as he whispered, "Dad, my teacher takes my lunch every day." Marcus Carter, a man known for his patience and quiet strength, froze. His eyes, dark and calculating, slowly lifted to meet his son's. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice calm, but there was something beneath it, something sharp and dangerous. Jordan swallowed hard. "He says it's against school rules, but no one else's lunch gets taken, just mine." His voice cracked. "I don't know why." Marcus set down his fork, his jaw tightening. He knew exactly why. For a moment, the kitchen was silent. Then Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Tomorrow," he said, "I want you to do exactly what you always do. Let him take it." Jordan blinked. "But just trust me," Marcus interrupted, a knowing edge in his tone. "Because tomorrow, he's not just taking your lunch. He's taking something else, too." Jordan didn't know what his father had planned, but as he lay in bed that night, he felt something. New hope. Marcus Carter sat frozen at the dinner table, his fork hovering midair as he processed what his son had just said. Across from him, Jordan sat with his head lowered, his fingers nervously picking at the hem of his shirt. His small voice wavered as he repeated himself. "He takes it every day, Dad. He says I can't eat until he says so." The words felt heavy, laced with months of silent suffering, but now they were out in the open, raw and undeniable. Marcus set his fork down slowly, his jaw tightening as he inhaled through his nose. His fists clenched on the table, knuckles turning white as he forced himself to stay calm. He had always taught Jordan to be respectful to his teachers, to follow the rules. But this was beyond unacceptable. His son had been starving at school, while an authority figure, someone meant to protect and educate, was deliberately humiliating him. The idea of it made Marcus's blood boil. "How long has this been happening?" he asked, his voice dangerously controlled. Jordan swallowed hard before whispering, "Since the beginning of the school year." Marcus's fists clenched harder, the muscles in his jaw twitching. Months. This had been happening for months, and his son had been too scared to tell him. His first instinct was to march into the school that very night, to demand answers, to make sure that teacher never stepped foot in a classroom again. But he forced himself to breathe, to think. Anger wouldn't fix this. Not yet. The next morning, as soon as the school office opened, Marcus was on the phone, his voice steady but firm. "I need to report an incident regarding my son's teacher, Mr. Collins." The receptionist on the other end of the line responded in a clipped, polite tone. "Of course, Mr. Carter. What seems to be the issue?" Marcus laid it all out. The daily lunch confiscations, the intimidation, the quiet bullying that his son had endured for months. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a carefully measured response. "Mr. Carter, Mr. Collins is a highly respected teacher. We have no reports of misconduct from any other students or parents." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. "So, because no one else has spoken up, my son's experience doesn't matter?" "I'm simply saying," the receptionist replied smoothly, "that perhaps this is a misunderstanding. Teachers are allowed to check lunches to ensure they meet school policy." Marcus exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay composed. "And what policy allows him to take my son's food without returning it?" There was another pause. Then, "If you'd like, you can schedule a meeting with Mr. Collins to discuss your concerns." A meeting. A polite way of brushing him off, of protecting their own. Marcus had seen this play out before. If he went in now, they'd listen, nod, promise to look into it, and then quietly do nothing. He needed something stronger, something undeniable. That night, as Jordan was getting ready for bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, carefully packing his son's lunchbox. But this time, it wasn't just sandwiches and fruit inside. He placed something else inside. Something small but powerful. When he was done, he zipped up the bag and walked into Jordan's room, kneeling down beside his bed. "Tomorrow," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "Don't say a word. Just let him take it." Jordan blinked up at his father, confusion flickering in his eyes. "But just trust me," Marcus interrupted, squeezing his son's shoulder gently. "This time, we're going to let him take it, and when he does, he's going to regret it." Jordan nodded slowly, still unsure of what his father had planned. But something about the way Marcus spoke made him feel safe. For the first time in months, he wasn't afraid of what the next school day would bring. The next day, the classroom hummed with the usual morning chatter as students settled into their seats, unzipping backpacks and organizing their supplies. Jordan sat at his desk, his fingers gripping the straps of his backpack tightly. He knew what was coming. He had seen this play out too many times before. Mr. Collins, as always, would walk over with that smug expression, take his lunch without a second thought, and humiliate him in front of the entire class. But today was different. Today, Jordan wasn't just a helpless child. Today, he had something his teacher would never see coming. As the lunch period approached, Mr. Collins moved through the rows, ensuring everything in his classroom was in order. He stopped beside Jordan's desk, just like he always did, and held out his hand. "You know the drill," he said, smirking. "Hand it over." Jordan swallowed the lump in his throat and hesitated for just a moment before slowly unzipping his bag and placing the lunchbox in the teacher's outstretched hand. His fingers lingered on it for half a second before he let go, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Mr. Collins barely glanced at him before turning away and carrying the lunchbox back to his desk, fully expecting yet another day of getting away with his quiet abuse of power. He placed the lunchbox down, clicked it open, and froze. For the first time since Jordan had been in his class, Mr. Collins' smirk disappeared. His eyes locked onto the contents inside, his body stiffening as realization dawned on him. Inside the lunchbox, nestled between a sandwich and a juice box, was a small recording device, its red light blinking ominously. Next to it was a neatly folded letter, printed in bold, unmistakable text. "You have been recorded taking my son's lunch. I have sent copies of this footage to the school board, the district attorney, and several parents. Try explaining this now." The classroom fell, silent. The students sitting closest to Mr. Collins leaned in slightly, eyes wide as they saw the words on the paper. A few gasped. Others whispered in shock, their eyes darting between the frozen teacher and Jordan, who sat completely still, watching. Mr. Collins' hands trembled as he picked up the paper, scanning the words again as if hoping they would change. His usual air of control, his condescending confidence, it all shattered in an instant. He looked around, his gaze shifting from the students to the door, as if searching for an escape. But there was none. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain composure. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice unsteady. "I was only enforcing school policies." A snicker came from somewhere in the room. A few students whispered among themselves, their usual fear of Mr. Collins suddenly gone. He had been caught, and everyone knew it. Panic flickered in Mr. Collins' eyes. He turned his gaze toward Jordan, who for the first time didn't look away. The boy, who had always been too scared to speak, too afraid to fight back, now sat. Tall, his hands folded neatly on his desk, his face unreadable. Slowly, he stood up. The classroom was deathly silent as all eyes were on him. Jordan took a step forward, looking his teacher in the eye, and in a firm, steady voice, he said, "You won't take anything from me again." A weight lifted from his chest as he spoke. He had spent months enduring the humiliation, believing he was powerless. But now, in that moment, he saw the truth. His silence had been his captor. His voice was his freedom. Mr. Collins' face flushed red. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. The damage was done. The class had seen everything. The power had shifted. The man who had once ruled the classroom with quiet intimidation now stood frozen, exposed for the coward he was. And Jordan. He didn't need to say another word. He had already won. Word spread faster than wildfire. By the time lunch ended, nearly everyone at the school had heard about what happened in Mr. Collins' classroom. Students whispered about the hidden recording device, the letter from Jordan's father, and, most importantly, the look of panic on Mr. Collins' face when he realized he had been caught. The news didn't stop at the students. Within hours, parents started receiving texts, emails, and phone calls. The story of a teacher stealing from a child and getting exposed for it was too outrageous to ignore. By the next morning, the recording had made its way to the faculty. Teachers spoke in hushed voices in the staff lounge, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others exchanging knowing glances, as if they had long suspected something was off about Collins but never had the proof to call him out. Parents began calling the school, demanding answers. The administration, which had brushed off Marcus Carter's concerns just a day before, suddenly found themselves facing an issue too big to cover up. And then something unexpected happened. Other students started coming forward. A girl from last year's class admitted that Collins had given her unfair grades, deliberately marking her assignments wrong despite them being correct. A boy from 2 years ago recalled how Collins had humiliated him in front of the class, calling him slow just because he had a learning disability. More and more stories emerged, painting a picture of a man who had abused his position for years, getting away with it because no one had dared to stand up to him. But now, that fear was gone. With mounting pressure from parents and undeniable proof in hand, the school had no choice. That afternoon, an announcement was made. Effective immediately, Mr. Collins is placed on suspension pending an investigation. The classroom was buzzing when Jordan walked in. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. Students who had once looked away when Collins took his lunch now nodded at him in silent respect. Some even whispered words of support. He had done something they all wished they could have done. He had stood up to the teacher they had feared. But while the school tried to contain the situation, Marcus Carter had other plans. That same afternoon, he arrived at the school, walking through the front doors with an air of quiet authority. He didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. His presence alone was enough. When he stepped into the principal's office, Mr. Carter barely had to introduce himself. Principal Richardson, a man who had dismissed his concerns just a day earlier, looked up, his face noticeably tense. "Mr. Carter," the principal began, forcing a tight smile, "I assure you, we are handling the situation appropriately. Mr. Collins has been placed on suspension while we conduct a thorough internal review." Marcus took a seat across from him, leaning forward slightly. His tone was calm, but there was an unmistakable sharpness in his words. "You ignored my complaint," he said, voice steady. "You dismissed my son's experience as if it was nothing. But now that parents are demanding answers, now that students are finally speaking up, you suddenly care?" The principal shifted uncomfortably. "We take all concerns seriously, Mr. Carter, but without prior reports," Marcus smirked, shaking his head. "No, you take concerns seriously when they become public." He let the words settle in before continuing, his gaze unwavering. "You're not handling this internally anymore. It's already being handled publicly." The principal's face paled slightly. He knew exactly what Marcus meant. The recording had been shared. Parents were talking. The school's reputation was now on the line. Marcus stood up, buttoning his jacket. "I expect real action. Not just for my son, but for every kid who suffered under that man." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out. Principal Richardson exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, as Jordan Carter walked through the school halls, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: confidence. For months, he had entered the classroom with his shoulders hunched, his head down, hoping to go unnoticed. But today, it was different. The whispers that once made him feel small were now filled with respect. His classmates, who had once turned away when Mr. Collins took his lunch, now looked at him with something new in their eyes. Not pity, not fear, but admiration. They had seen what he had done. He had stood up against a teacher that everyone feared. He had exposed the truth, something no one else had dared to do. And now, Mr. Collins was gone. The school had made the announcement that morning. The board had officially launched an investigation, but by the time they had begun digging into his history, more complaints had surfaced. Parents came forward with stories their children had been too afraid to tell before. Teachers who had once overlooked his behavior started whispering about the things they had seen but never reported. And before the school could fire him, Collins had resigned, slinking away before the full extent of his misconduct could be laid bare. His career was over. No school would ever take him again. As Jordan took his seat in the classroom, he noticed the teacher's desk sitting empty. For the first time since the beginning of the school year, there was no one there to intimidate him. No one watching him like a predator waiting to pounce. He exhaled slowly, a weight lifting from his chest. He had fought back, and he had won. That evening, as he sat across from his father at the dinner table, Jordan could see the pride in Marcus Carter's eyes. The man who had always taught him to be strong, to be wise, to pick his battles, now looked at him as if he had already won the biggest fight of his life. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying his son for a moment before speaking. "Power isn't about who's in charge, son," he said finally, his voice calm but full of meaning. "It's about knowing when to fight." Jordan met his father's gaze, the words settling into his mind in a way they never had before. For months, he had believed that power belonged to those like Mr. Collins, people who could control others, who could make the rules and bend them at will. But now he saw the truth. Real power wasn't about authority, it was about standing up, speaking out, and knowing when enough was enough. He smiled, nodding slowly. "I get it now." Marcus smirked, ruffling Jordan's hair before leaning back in his chair. "Good," he said, "because this world will always have bullies. The difference is, now you know how to handle them." And for the first time in his life, Jordan knew he would never be afraid again. Abuse of power happens everywhere, even in classrooms where students should feel safe. But when we stand up, when we refuse to stay silent, we make a difference. Jordan Carter was once just another quiet kid, afraid to challenge the authority that controlled him. But the moment he stood his ground, everything changed. A teacher who had gotten away with years of bullying was exposed, and a system that once ignored injustice was forced to take action. If this were your child, what would you have done? Have you ever witnessed someone in power abusing their authority? Have you ever been in a situation where speaking up seemed impossible? Share your experiences in the comments because your voice matters. When we talk about injustice, we take the first step toward change. And if you believe in holding those in power accountable and making sure stories like Jordan's don't happen again, then subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Together, we can shine a light on the truth and demand justice where it's needed. Jordan, walking down the hallway, his head held high. No longer afraid, no longer invisible. A teacher at the door notices him and, for the first time, holds it. They open for him as he passes. A small but powerful sign that the power dynamics have shifted. The boy who once walked in fear now walks with confidence. Because standing up changes everything.